Everybody just got done reading The Marrow Tradition by Mr. Chesnut. It was written back in 1901, and it really depicts the tension between the white people and the black people in America at that time. Now, Mr. Chesnut, he is pushing for racial equality, peace and harmony, but the book discusses the race riots that happened in Wilmington, North Carolina. This is a fictional book. The town is Wilmington, North Carolina, what it happens in, and the families that are involved, they never existed, but they're supposed to really reflect a time in our past where things weren't so smooth. You know, we just came out of the Civil War, and we're in this period of history where we're trying to build the nation back together, the Reconstructionist era, if you will. So the South is trying to find out what its identity is. I mean, they lost. They're licking their wounds. They're trying to rebuild their cities, and they have these people that live amongst them that they used to be slaves that are now free. And the white people are trying to figure out how to react, how they're supposed to interact, and what they're supposed to do going forward. So there's a lot of answers that need to be found, through this period of history. Pretty intriguing, I think. I never really looked at that part of American history before, the Reconstructionist era of the South. And I think this, best I can tell, it's a pretty good reflection of what went on in Wilmington, North Carolina. Anyway, the book starts out with Major Carteret, I believe that's his name, Major Carteret, and his wife, and she's about ready to give birth to their child. And the doctor goes downstairs because there's a period where Olivia's resting, the child isn't ready to come out yet, and he's talking with the housemaid, old Mammy Jane. And they're talking about Olivia's half-sister. Well, it turns out Olivia's father, after his first wife died, remarried his black house servant, and they had a child together. And living in the same town of Wilmington is Olivia's half-sister, who is of mixed race. She's half black, half white, and the family doesn't want to even acknowledge that she exists. On one hand, they know that she's there. She's a living, breathing person, part of the community. But on the other hand, it's like they think that she's a stain on their family somehow. Just from the color of her skin and her parentage, I guess. I don't fully understand it. I've never lived in that type of setting where I was raised to hate a group of people or despise a group of people based upon something as superficial as skin color. But this stuff, I suppose, still happens. And it's sad to see. It was sad in this book, and it certainly is sad in real life where real people are affected by it. And I think Mr. Chesnut was successful because it really, at least it made me think about, race relations, where they're at now, where they were, and the struggle that the black people had to go through to be freed from slavery and eventually gain the right to vote, and of course overcome the voter law restrictions that were enacted soon after because the white people were trying to repress the black people, at least in the South. That's mostly where this was coming out of. And this book discusses, as I said, the race riot that happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the events that were really brought up, how that brought out the riots. There's a couple cool little side stories. There's a little love triangle that kind of keeps your interest up. There is a murder mystery in this book. So if you like mysteries, there's a little bit of one in here. I think Mr. Chesnut made a point to say that, there's wise people on both sides of the fence, both for black people and white people, and there's also some people that really need to learn more, about race relations and how to interact with each other. So I think Mr. Chesnut was trying to be fair, but at the same time he was reflecting the point that it was the white people that were repressing the black people. And you'll see what I mean when we get into that book, because there are the black slaves that were freed, and they're still kind of in that servant role. And you can't blame them, because that's all they knew. They weren't educated. They were always trained to serve white people. So when they were freed, they kind of fell into that mold. This is who I'm going to serve. This is where I get my money. This is where I, find my identity, if you will, in my life. I was trained to be a butler, so I'm going to continue to be a butler. I was trained to be a house servant, so that's what I'm going to continue to be. So this book definitely shows how slow change can be and how quick change can come about through something as violent as a riot. Now, Mr. Chesnut isn't trying to advocate violence, but it is saying that it is a byproduct of society where one people is trying to suppress the rights of another. And certainly that is even reflected today. I mean, there's no argument about that. We see it all the time. Police brutality, and there's people demonstrated in the streets, and there's clashes sometimes with the police. So it is a real part of a struggle. Okay, ideally, you'd like change to be peaceful. You'd like it to be swift and flowing, where everybody can enjoy the fruits of freedom, but that certainly is not the case. The other point that I wanted to bring out is about the characters themselves. I think Mr. Chesnut goes into a great deal of time discussing the decisions that these people made and how they arrived to them. And it kind of shows you that the actions that people take and what they do in life is rather complicated. I mean, you can't just answer for one reason and say, oh, this person did that, so they're completely racist. I mean, there's other factors involved of why they act a certain way. Not saying it's right. Shouldn't be that way, Ideally, you should, make a decision based on everyone's best interest. But selfishness is pervasive in society. And Mr. Chesnut, the writer and author, he brought that out. If there's one thing that's tested and true in society, is that people will act on their own best interests. Like Dr. Price in the book, I mean, he's a prime example of that. And certainly Major Carteret, he's trying to protect his wealth, his status, his perceived control over the city. He doesn't want to let the black people have any sort of input on how they live their lives. Completely ridiculous, but that's how he thought. And times were much different back then. So I'm glad I read this book. I hope you read it too. Again, The Marrow of Tradition. I would consider it a classic. Very good read. It's technically smooth to read. It flows from chapter to chapter. It certainly reflects the times that America went through, and the understanding and grips that we had to come to understand what freedom truly is for all people, and how we should be striving to live together in peace and harmony to make that happen. So, made me think. Of course, that's what you want out of a book, right? Get a little entertainment, sure, but also to make you think and hopefully change and become a better person. And certainly some of these issues I've thought a lot more about in greater detail. So, all right, bye-bye.